Hi everyone, for today's video we're going to be talking about 18 major moments in Hispanic history that all Americans have to know about. To begin with, I'm going to be starting with Cabeza de Vaca. So, Hispanics and mestizos are indigenous and Afro-descended people from Mexico. So they had explored North America almost about a century before the British founded Jamestown. In 1528, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca from Spain, with other three people, was shipwrecked off the Texas coast. So him and his partners were the first to set foot in Texas. So now I'll be talking about how Los Angeles was founded in 1781. So a group of 44 people consisting of Spaniards, indigenous people, Afro-Latinos, and mestizos founded the city of Los Angeles, which as of right now has 1.919 million Hispanics living in it. LA was then founded in September 4, 1781. They had left Mexico without, they did not expect to find Los Angeles, but luckily enough they founded Los Angeles. Number 3 is gonna be Jose Marti. Jose Marti was a revolutionary Cuban nationalist and poet that lived in New York for 4 years. For those 4 years, he wrote English and Spanish newspaper where he wrote his ideas that influenced his thoughts about the tense relationship between the U.S. and Latin America. He had a newspaper called La Patria. Apart from this, he also gained Cuban their independence, and it is said that he also caused the Spanish-American War. Due to all his accomplishments, he has a statue in front of Central Park in Manhattan. So, the U.S. extends the citizenship to Puerto Ricans in 1917. On March 2, 1917, the Shaftworth Act was signed, which made all Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenships regardless of their Puerto Rican citizenship. This means that even they could have both citizenships and it didn't matter, they could still have the American one. This made Puerto Ricans Americans just like anyone else born in the U.S. So, this just proves how we can all be from here. Who was Octaviano Larrazolo? Octaviano Larrazolo was from Valle de Allende, Chihuahua, Mexico, and was the first ever Hispanic to be elected to the U.S. Senate in 1928. He was a Republican politician who helped write part of the state's constitution that guaranteed the people of Mexican descent wouldn't be denied of any right or privilege. This is honestly an honor since he was the first Hispanic ever in history to be elected in the U.S. Senate, and he really cared about his people because he made sure that Mexicans had the same rights as anyone else. So, before the Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, courts said that it was unconstitutional to segregate students of Mexican heritage into lesser schools. Back then, Mexicans couldn't mix with white people, and they even had it was kind of like it wasn't really like the racism they had towards black people, because honestly I feel like that one was worse, but they just like didn't want any Mexicans to mix with any white people. So Sylvia Mendez, of Puerto Rican and Mexican heritage, sued after whites only public school in California had rejected her. The decision from the Circuit Court of Appeals in 1947 helped prepare the way for Brown v. Board of Education and played a big role on making school segregation illegal. Now I'll be talking about Felix Longoria. So Felix Longoria was a Mexican-American soldier that was in the World War II. He died in the Philippines right when World War II was coming to an end. Once his family brought him back to the Three Rivers, Texas, where he was from, the director of the funeral didn't allow the family to use the chapel because they were afraid that some white people would disapprove and would start like a fight or an argument. Then the civil rights organization called the GI Forum, which was led by Hector P. Garcia, organized a campaign that got the attention of the then U.S. Senator Lyndon Johnson, who helped Longoria to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery the way he deserved because he served in the US military, and this helped start the march toward Latino civil rights movement. So now I'll be talking about how the Cuban Revolution came to power in 1959. So right after Cuba won the revolution in 1959, Fidel Castro, a Cuban revolutionary, a politician who was the prime minister from 1959 to 1976, and Cuban president of from 1976 to 2008, established a communist government that is still up to date. More than 1 million Cubans left Cuba and settled in Miami, Florida, which is the state that they molded. Then in 1990, after the end of the Soviet Union, the Cuban economy raised. So for number 9, I will be talking about the annual Great Picker Strike of 1965 to 1970. So it all started in 1965 in Delano, California, when Latino and Filipino farm workers got together to protest against the poor working conditions and low pay of grape farmers or pickers. It was a 5-year-long campaign that helped by forcing the grape producers to sign a union contract. It raised their pay, had healthcare benefits, and safety protection for pesticides. For number 10, I'm going to be talking about the Suit Suit Riot. So this horrible thing took place in California in the 1940s. So authorities from California viewed many young Chicanos, which are American and Mexican origins, who wore baggy suits as criminals. They would beat them up. The events grew within the time to the point that in June 1943, 200 sailors went through LA beating these Chicanos, also called Pachucos, up, and even ripped their suits from their bodies. This served as crystal clear evidence of the racial discrimination the people from Mexican descent had to face. This also later on served as a symbol of resistance for Mexican Americans. So for number 11, we have Ruben Salazar. So who was Ruben Salazar? Ruben Salazar was a civil rights activist and reporter for the Los Angeles Times. He was the first Mexican American journalist from mainstream media that covered the Chicano community. In August 29, 1970, Ruben was drinking a beer at the Silver Dollar Bar and Cafe. During a riot in Los Angeles, a police shot him with a tear gas canister, which caused him to die. So this was kind of a hatred towards him because, as I stated before, he was the first to cover the Chicano community, which maybe angered some of the white people, and they decided to kill him. So now we're gonna move on to Roberto Clemente. Roberto Clemente helped change the MLB history. Roberto Clemente was a Puerto Rican professional baseball player in the Pittsburgh Pirates. He started his career by the end of segregation. During his career, he reached 3,000 hits and played 2 World Series in which he won the MVP, which means Most Valued Player, in the 1971 games. He helped represent the Hispanic community since there was only little amount of Hispanics in the big sports by that time. Other than this, he also served as a role model to many young Latino kids who wanted to pursue the career of sports. He said, "Cuando tengas la oportunidad de marcar la diferencia en este mundo y no lo hagas, entonces pierdes tu tiempo en la tierra," which means, anytime you have an opportunity to make a difference in this world and you don't, then you're wasting your time on earth. For number 13 of 18 major events that all Americans have to know about the Hispanics, is that in November 6th of 1986, the 40th U.S. President Ronald Reagan signed an immigration reform into law that made legal 3 million people that were in the U.S. during that time. My grandpa from my dad's side happened to be here when that happened, and due to that, my grandpa was able to give papers to all of my 14 aunts and uncles. So now we're going to be talking about how NAFTA was signed in 1944. So in 1944, Mexico, the US, and Canada signed a free trade agreement that reduced trade barriers. So that's what NAFTA means. NAFTA means NAFTA means North American Free Trade Agreement. So, cheap U.S. imports put Mexican farms out of business, causing millions of Mexican farm workers to lose their jobs. As a result of this, many Mexican people immigrated to the U.S. So, even though many people in the U.S. believe that Hispanics immigrate to the U.S. in search of American dreams, in some of the U.S. economic policies that cause their jobs to collapse and cause them to come to America. What was Prop 187? In 1944, Governor Pitt Wilson from California championed the Proposition 187 ballot that would make it illegal to provide public service even in schools and hospitals to undocumented immigrants. This event was taken to court, but luckily this law didn't pass. This helped make or build the way of anti-immigrant legislation by nativists and the Republican Party. They thought that since they weren't from here and we were illegals, we didn't deserve to have equal treatment just like anyone else born here, when we technically do because we are all human beings. Now we're going to talk about how in Arizona they literally banned the study of the Mexican American culture or history. So it all happened when Republicans heard that an experimental Mexican American curriculum in Tucson, Arizona, politicized students. They passed a legislation to shut it down due to the pressure that state officials were putting on the local board of education. By doing so, students will not be able to learn about the Hispanic history, which makes total no sense. And because their job of the schools is to educate students from all topics. It doesn't matter the subject, it doesn't matter the topic, what it's about. Their job is to educate, especially when it comes to history, because history is history. It has no boundaries. History is history, and it's what makes us us. So now we're going to talk about how Hispanics was the largest ethnic group in the most populous U.S. state. So in 2014, Latinos were the largest ethnic group in California. To give you an idea of how large it was, there was 14 million Hispanic people living in California. There's many states in the U.S. where Hispanics are the largest ethnic group, and there's a lot of Latinos that have been in this country for a long period of time, which technically makes all Hispanics and Latino people Americans just like anyone else born in this country. And last but not least, for number 18, we have the pill trials in Puerto Rico. So it all began in the late 50s when some Puerto Rican women were used as an experiment for the first birth control pills. The women were not told it was an experiment and were not aware of the side effects this could have. In addition to all of this, women got very sick, but they got ignored. And 3 women who participated died. And no further investigation was ever made of what caused its death. So it gets me thinking, why would they do this? What were they gonna get from it? This just shows the consequences of this horrible hate that some Americans have towards Hispanics and how far they can go. So this is the end of my video. These were the 18 major events in Hispanic history that all Americans need to know. As you could tell, there was a lot of bad events, good events, inspirational events, good achievements of the Hispanic community, some of the hatred that Hispanics had to face years ago. But this is actually nothing to be ashamed of. It's actually something that we as Hispanics and Latinos should be proud of, because thanks to that strength and that resistance that all of our ancestors faced, and how they were still maintained strong and together, this is what makes us us nowadays. And I don't know, actually reading all about this, because literally I didn't know anything about this until this video, and learning about it really made me even more proud of what I was to be a Latina of Mexican parents.